Hi, I'm Kevin Rebeck, President for the Manitoba Federation of Labour. Workers want to work and provide for their families, and no one wants to see workers on picket lines during a strike or a lockout with no end in sight. That's just not good for anyone. Which is why I want to talk to you about a Made in Manitoba tool that's helped workers and employers in our province reach fair deals and prevent long, drawn-out bitter strikes and lockouts for the last 20 years. It's a tool we should be proud of, and it's a tool that's under threat from Brian Pallister. But first, a little about the collective bargaining process. Right now in Manitoba, when collective bargaining takes place between employers and workers, over 95% of the time, a deal's reached that both sides think is fair. But sometimes bargaining gets stuck, when one side or the other won't compromise or move enough to get a deal. When that happens, it may mean the employer locks workers out, no longer allowing them to work or get paid unless they accept an employer's last offer. Or it may mean a union goes on strike, where workers refuse to work and no longer get a paycheck. Typically, when there's a strike or lockout, both sides want to find a way to return to the bargaining table and reach a settlement. But in cases when both sides can't come to an agreement, we've had a Made in Manitoba tool that says when a strike or lockout has reached 60 days, 2 months, either side can ask for help, and a neutral third-party arbitrator comes in. The arbitrator meets with the parties, and they settle the dispute. What the arbitrator decides is what goes in the deal, and the strike or lockout's over. The tool is often called binding arbitration or alternative dispute resolution, and it's worked well to prevent bitter labor disputes in Manitoba for 2 decades. But now, Brian Pallister wants to change the rules of how bargaining is done in Manitoba and get rid of this tool, which is in no one's best interest. In fact, Brian Pallister's government asked for advice from employers and labor before proposing these changes, and they both told them to keep the current binding arbitration tool in place because it makes sure workers can get back to work and businesses can get back to operating within a reasonable time period following a labor dispute. The reality is, we see so many collective agreements settled without a strike or lockout in Manitoba because most employers and unions would rather settle a dispute on their own terms. Most employers and unions would rather negotiate than risk a labor dispute and having an arbitrator make decisions they may not like. In this way, the binding arbitration tool creates a strong incentive to solve the problems and reach agreements before an arbitrator has to get involved. The tool of binding arbitration also ensures an end to a strike or lockout, preventing them from dragging on even when one or both sides are being stubborn and unreasonable. Preventing long strikes or lockouts makes sense for workers, it makes sense for businesses, and it makes sense for our economy. We should be proud of the Made in Manitoba solution. We shouldn't cast it aside just because Brian Pallister would rather strikes and lockouts continue indefinitely. If he's allowed to bring in this change, it'll lead to more strikes and lockouts and ones that last much longer. That's not good for our economy, it's not good for workers, and it's not good for employers.